Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to go over my top 5 wintertime baits. These baits work across the country, so even if you live in a place not like the frozen tundra here in Wisconsin, you can use these baits to your advantage to catch big fish during the coldest time of the year. You're talking about fish that are very lethargic. A lot of these fish are feeding once a week. They're not actively, aggressively chasing down bait, so you gotta get your bait in front of those fish. You're not gonna be able to bring your bait 15 feet above them and have them come up and chase it. That just generally does not happen during the winter time period. When you're talking about water that's in the 40-degree range or lower, these fish are sitting with their bellies on the bottom. They're just not looking to chase. And these baits that I've got for you are the ones that'll get the job done. So let's go over them. First and foremost, if you watch my channel, you know how much of a fan I am of blade baits. Probably the #1 cold water bait around the country. This is something that not only catches bass, it catches all game fish. But when you're talking about your water temps in the low 40-degree range or cooler, a blade bait is an absolute dynamite bait. This is a Jackal Knockin' Jaw, one of my favorites, but there's a lot of good ones out there. Silver Buddy makes a good one, the Berkeley Vibrato, a lot of good baits. The key here is a bait that gets to the bottom, and with relatively little rod movement, you can get it to vibrate and then drop right back down to the bottom. But when you're talking about dormant fish laying there with their bellies in the mud, this is one of those baits that you can really still generate a reaction strike by just picking it up and letting it vibrate and fall back down in front of them. It triggers them to eat. One of the few baits that does that during the wintertime months. Next up, you gotta have a small swim bait. This is a 3.3 Kitech Swing Impact Fat on a core tackle tush swim bait head. This is the 2/0 3/16 ounce size. A easy meal for a bass is a wounded shad or a wounded bait fish. Anytime you get into that 50-degree range or cooler, a lot of times what you'll start to experience is some form of forage species die off. You get shad that are starting to die. Basically, any smaller fish that is weak, the time for them to die is generally going to be during that falling water temperature period, which presents an extremely easy meal for bass. And a simple, small swim bait is one of those meals that's hard for a fish to resist. But remember, you got to get this down to their level. One nice thing with a swim bait is you can fish it in 3 feet, you can fish it in 40 feet. But you got to get this down to about their level. You want to bring it right across the top of their heads. You don't want to keep it 5 feet above them. You want to keep it bumping across the top of them. Next up, even though the primary forage during the cold water period is going to be bait fish, there still is a time and a place for a football jig. Specifically, I really like a tungsten football jig. This is Picasso's with a Berkeley meaty chunk on the back. Generally speaking, I like a chunk in cold water periods. The less action seems to be better than putting a big cross style kicker bait on it. But the tungsten's really key because it's going to do 2 things. A lot of times during the winter period, you're fishing extremely deep water, so you're going to maintain much better feel with the tungsten. The tungsten also, when you do find those hard spots, which is where most of the fish are going to be, is going to create a better sound than your lead. And that sound from a tungsten does seem to generate better bites if you're fishing around those hard bottom areas. But the nice thing with a football jig is you can fish super deep with them, you can keep it in the strike zone, and it's one of those baits that the fish still tend to bite pretty good during the winter months. All right, one of the all-time best cold water baits, a jerkbait. This is a Berkeley Stunna 112. The key to a jerkbait, similar to your swim bait, is you gotta get this down to about where the fish are at. You don't want to get it below them. You want to get it to their level and slightly above. But again, they're not going to come up and chase that much. The clearer the water, the more they'll chase, but you still want to keep this right in the strike zone. The nice thing with a jerkbait is you can keep it there, meaning they tend to suspend. Now, I personally prefer the Stunna in really cold water because it sinks slowly, which means I can get it down to where those fish are at and keep it above their head. But the key with a jerkbait is once it sits there, you snap it a couple of times and it creates a reaction strike. So even from a lethargic fish, they're still going to bite a jerkbait if you can get them to react to this. Jerkbait's one of the best baits at generating those reaction strikes. Last up is your umbrella rig. So this is a Picasso schoolie rig. Now in my case here, I've got it weighted with a couple of big weights on the bottom. I did a video about why that's so special. The key here is though, you have shad that start to group up in the winter time. They present easy meals for the bass, and an umbrella rig is one of those baits that just generates the biggest fish in the lake to bite. If they're going to exert energy in that cold water period, why go for one swim bait when they can eat a whole school of them? That's generally what generates those big fish to bite. So don't overlook your umbrella rigs. Make sure you check your state regulations to see what is legal. But if you're able to throw them, definitely give something like the schoolie rig a try. But these 5 baits, more than any other time in the year, I have less rods on the deck. These 5 baits are the ones that I use during the winter time period. It is very, very rare when one of these 5 baits is not the hot bait. So let me know in the comment section. If you have another winter bait that you think others would learn from you, put it in the comment section. Otherwise, if you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.